I try to avoid any hardcore politics on this channel just because I think in general it's one of those things that's just obnoxious and it's been inundated into society everywhere. Like, you cannot get away from it. The only time I cover that kind of stuff is when I think it's either funny or just outlandishly, ridiculously, pathetically sad. And this is kind of one of both. This is a combination of both. And of course, we get to go back and tackle our old buddy CBR.com. Of course, again, as always, it's been a while since we've talked about CBR. I thought we were kind of, kicking them while they were down, but this one was a little hard to ignore. Now, before we get into it, like I said in the intro, and I always say, do not contact the author of this, do not contact anyone from CBR, do not contact anyone at all, please. I don't control what you do, but YouTube's terms of service make it so that I have to say that now because of just a few outliers that do that whenever somebody talks about somebody else. We're here to laugh and meme on this ridiculous ideology and idea, not bully a person. And I genuinely think a lot of times that's what people want. I think a lot of times they make these kinds of outlandish takes to get your attention so that you'll go after them, so that they will get more traffic and more views. And because of that, I have done the good deed of archiving this exact page. So if you'd like to read this article without giving the author any money or click impressions for their insane take, that's in the description down below. But what are we talking about? Well, the Punisher is no Daredevil, and there's no place for him in the MCU. That is the leader, the headline here. With Daredevil Born Again, a beloved character retakes his place in the MCU. Another Netflix-era character, the Punisher, deserves no such place, is what this person wrote in their article. They went on to talk about why they believe this. First off, we have to have the mandatory paragraph or two that kind of waste time in terms of taking up space, so that you spend more time on the page, since that's one of the things one of the metrics these sites are measured on. But when they actually get to the point of this character, they start talking about how Jon Bernthal humanized the Punisher. However, this is where it gets good. Despite this, the fact remains that whatever his motivations, Frank Castle, Punisher, is a character whose primary means of solving problems is shooting people. In a country where the threat of a real-life shooter feels ever present, foregrounding such a character feels, at best, tone-deaf. They go on to talk about how the issue of Punisher's modus operandi is the fact that many members of militant white supremacist groups, by the way, they're not the only ones if you actually look at the news. I can't say much more than that, but watch the news, watch the mugshots. I'm telling you, they're not just white supremacist groups. There are insane people from every background who shoot people. However, let's continue, have adopted the character's skull symbol as their own. And that is true. There have been people who have co-opted the Punisher's skull symbol the same way that asshole in Germany co-opted what was originally seen as a peaceful sign and used it to perpetuate German nationalism and push World War II. Obviously, this can happen with any symbol, especially if you just give it to them, which I don't know if you remember we were talking about before. Marvel was considering not even using the skull anymore and stuff like that, basically just handing it over to the lunatics who want to use it as a symbol of hate, because that's going to solve it, just like it did with Pepe, and just like it has with every other symbol, but I digress. They went on to talk about how Frank Castle wields a variety of lethal, high-powered firearms and explosives, but because he only uses them against bad guys, normal people needn't worry about him or his arsenal. Leaving aside the moral implications of the terms good guy and bad guy, so now we're getting into moral relativism, which, if you don't know, basically is the argument that there is no right and wrong, that anything is acceptable or permissible under the right circumstances, and essentially that people have crafted morality subjectively. So the problem I have with that, which I think it's important to address this real quick in the middle, is that moral subjectivism or moral relativism, if you go too far down that road, it essentially hits things like murder, assault, even of the, I want to say, inappropriate variety, like down there, all of that stuff. That's all been deemed bad just because of the idea of treat other people nicely so you get treated nicely, or because it maintains order. I think that's something most people, regardless of their belief system, disagree with, that all morals are relative. I just hit my hand on the desk. And when we start getting into things like, well, there's bad implications for the terms good guy and bad guy, that's kind of what we're getting into, is moral relativism. It's, listen, anything's okay under the right circumstances. And that's true of some things. You know, we do accept some things as not immoral depending on the situation. Like, for example, I would argue that most people who are not deranged believe that common sense self-defense, like you are backed into a corner, there's nowhere to go, someone is going to kill you, but you kill them instead. Most people, not all, but most psychologically sound people would agree that that's not technically immoral to defend yourself in that situation, even if the other person ends up dying, right? I mean, that's just an example of something that would normally be considered immoral. Like if you walked into someone's house and removed them from the world, that is considered immoral by almost everybody. The people who it's not considered immoral by are lunatics, and I think almost everybody can agree with that. The thing with Punisher that's very complicated is kind of his motivations, but also his own ideology of himself. Now, Punisher is obviously already what we would call slightly what would you say? He's not like a perfect narrator of his own life. And what I mean by that is he is not 100% mentally sound. However, that's something that he admits all the time in different adaptations of him. It's important to note that with this character, the way that they kind of get into this in the article, talking about how alt-right adherents see themselves in the Punisher, blah, 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 blah. It's a very flawed ideology to put that off on the character because of this. You can do that with anything, because there's a lot of people in different hate groups and in different vigilante groups, or even in different protesting groups, who put on masks and destroy things and destroy like black homes and black owned communities. For example, in my state, in Minnesota, there was a lot of stuff going on the last few years with a very, very, very horrible death. Obviously, I'm sure you know what I'm talking about, involving the police, which then got into a lot of protests. And a lot of them were protests that were done for a good reason, right? But there were also a lot of people who used that kind of stuff, who identify with different fictional characters, who used symbols of different characters as they committed crimes, or who would wear a mask with different characters on them and stuff like that. And I think that it becomes very tough when you start putting off the character on that. So like, for example, if tomorrow someone in a Spider-Man hat went into downtown Minneapolis and they burned down a black-owned business, that doesn't mean that all Spider-Man fans are bad, or that Spider-Man is glorifying that racist act, right? What it means is just some dumbass used that symbol and was either just wearing it just because they could, or was trying to taint it. And a lot of times what ends up happening is we give them those symbols and let them taint it, which in my opinion is what this person wants to do with the Punisher, because Punisher never glorifies himself anyway. Like, let's actually look at the writing of Punisher and all these different things. In the Netflix MCU-ish adaptation, which I will, until the day I die, maintain is canon to the MCU, in that adaptation, Punisher doesn't go around saying about how great he is, or like how good of a person he is. That never really happens. That doesn't happen in the Punisher show. It's more taken as like a vengeance-fueled crusade, and you even see his mental instability in Daredevil in season 2. You also see him kind of admit when he's talking to Daredevil and talking about how, you know, you hit them and they get up, I hit them and they stay down. The idea isn't I hit them and then I like do the gritty over their body and get off to it. The idea is essentially removing something bad from the world. And the times that we do see Punisher remove someone from the world in the show and in Daredevil, for the most part, are very, very, very horrible people. And I understand if you're morally relativist, you can try and argue these people are not terrible, but holy cow, no one will take you seriously. Like, for example, when Punisher went into, I believe it was the convenience store, was it the gas station? I'm trying to remember, it's a very famous scene, and the dude offers him images of underage people and stuff like that, and he shuts the shades and he beats the guy's head in, okay? That's an example of somebody who's very bad, who wanted to exploit and hurt children, right? Innocent people, and that the Punisher removed from the world. But he didn't do the gritty, floss over him on the CCTV and then leave a note about how awesome it is to be the Punisher. You actually look at some of the things he says in these shows. You look at the things he says in the comics especially. The Punisher is never saying he's the good guy. Ever. And that's where I think a lot of people have a misconception of this character. They think this character promotes and accentuates violence, right? That this character is a symbol that can be co-opted by people, which any symbol is, by the way. Any symbol can be co-opted by people. That's why I find this so ridiculous. But Punisher even says in the comics, essentially, that when he's done, he has one left for himself. You know, he has one bullet left for the last person he knows is guilty, which is him. He's admitting that he knows the things he's doing are wrong. He believes that they are removing filth from the world and making the world better, but he certainly doesn't believe it's making his life better. He certainly doesn't believe he's the good guy in any way. He just sees himself as a less bad guy. You know, and you look at the comics especially, I think one of the more interesting ones is during Civil War. I believe when the Secret Avengers are kind of being formed and Punisher is essentially confronted by Captain America because of his readiness to kill. And Captain America basically beats the shit out of him. And you know what Punisher does? He won't hit him back because that's his hero. He even says that's the kind of person he wants to be, but can't. So when you're looking at these mentally unstable people in real life who want to take these, I don't know, symbols or these characters and use them, I find it bizarre to, one, just give them to them, and two, I find it very bizarre to connect everything to real world politics anyway, because if we do that, then we have to do that on both sides. If we were going to dig through everyone's lives, you know, CIA style, and go through how many people who committed non-peaceful protests and burned down buildings or got people killed, or who have assaulted people inappropriately, or who have murdered someone somewhere, were fans of Spider-Man? How many of them were fans of Batman? You know, how many of them went and saw The Dark Knight? You know what I mean? Like, you start associating this kind of stuff with it, and you very quickly put the problems in the real world off on something very, very silly, and you essentially take that away from the 99.9% of people, because there's 0.01% of people that you're saying can't differentiate fiction and fact from each other, which they won't be able to anyway, regardless of what we're talking about, if you truly believe that. I also believe, not to get into my own politics, but it's very amusing to me how inundated this article is with them, especially with this line. Even if Marvel is able to extricate, which, by the way, I've noticed these people use very big words on purpose to try and sound intelligent, but I digress, the Punisher from his unintentional far-right associations, which we just admitted they're unintentional, the character still perpetuates a dangerous myth: the good guy with a gun, which I find very funny, because who are the first people that someone like who wrote this article call when they need help? Say somebody is in your house and they're screaming like, I'm going to violate you. Who's the person you're going to call? You're probably not going to call, some random guy down the street. You're probably going to call 911, right? And while I know a lot of people have problems with the police, and I've had my own problems, which I don't want to get into here, with encounters with police in real life and good encounters, despite that, if somebody showed up, you know what I mean, and saved you from this individual, that would be an example of a good guy with a gun. There was actually an example of this, I believe, a few weeks ago. Now, this doesn't happen often, it's worth mentioning, but where there was an active blam situation in the United States that was actually ended by a good guy with a gun. Okay, so this is not a myth, even if it's not something that happens all the time. So it's very, very, very bizarre to me to kind of put that in here and put that baggage off on Punisher. It's just weird and kind of unhinged, in my opinion, to kind of have to drag that into this. But I digress. It's not even correct. Like, I'm not somebody who believes, and I think I have to say this because when you get into this stuff, it gets very complex. I'm not somebody who believes that every single individual should have that kind of thing. Now, if you are, justify it, justify that. But I think there are a lot of people who are very unhinged or who just can't handle that kind of thing. But I can tell you for sure that if somebody pulled one of those things around this person in a mall or in their home, and somebody else pulled one and ended that person, the good guy with a gun wouldn't be considered a myth to this person. It's just bizarre to me how people will put off their own political ideology on all of these characters, especially Marvel. Marvel has tackled some political stuff, yes. but it tries to do so, I believe, with some level of tact, not heavy-handedness for the most part. It's not always perfect by any means, but things like the surveillance state being tackled in Captain America 2, things like domestic created terror being tackled in Iron Man 3, things like absolute power obviously being tackled in the later on, Infinity Saga films, even racial relations being tackled in Falcon and the Winter Soldier. It's not like these things are off limits to Marvel. And in fact, some of them did come up in Daredevil and did come up in The Punisher, but they're mostly handled with tact and class. And The Punisher, he's never painted as the good guy. He's just painted as the guy who's willing to get rid of the worst guys, who again is saving the last one for himself. I think that people who absolutely idolize the Punisher are kind of missing the point of him. He even sees himself more as a necessary evil type thing, but, you're not going to convince any of these people anyway. So I'll be interested to hear what you think in the comments down below. I'll be interested to see how many subs I lose, because whenever you mention something serious, there's a lot of people who can't handle it, who get very, very upset and kind of run to a safe space. And that's true of both sides of the political aisle in the United States and really everywhere. It's very odd to me, but regardless, I'm interested to see the outcome of this one. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Please be sure to leave a like if you enjoyed this, subscribe for more content. Maybe you can change the myth of the Degenerate J channel that never grows. It's like the myth of the good guy with a gun, but it's actually like viewable in real time. Like YouTube stalled it out so we can just kind of see it not happening. Let me know what you think down there. Please be sure to, like and subscribe. As always, have a fantastic day, everyone, and stay shway. I'm a little flustered. These people really piss me off, man. It's there's way too much of this crap at every level of society. Nobody can unplug. Nobody can enjoy fiction. It really reminds me of the Doom thing with Columbine, where it was like blaming Doom and blaming Marilyn Manson's music and stuff like that, and not taking accountability of how we raise our kids, our ideas on morality, which, by the way, if we are all morally relative, no wonder a lot of people think it's acceptable to take out a weapon and kill people. Regardless, I don't know. I'm going to end it. I'll see you later. And then not end it in that way. I'm ending the video. Got to be clear. Sorry, YouTube. Don't contact anyone. Thanks.